150 years ago this month, President Abraham Lincoln set aside the first public lands in the country for resort and recreation, Yosemite Valley. An exhibit opening Monday at the California Historical Society in San Francisco looks at the human stories that are part of Yosemite's history. Executive Director Anthea Hartig shared some of those stories with Scott Shafer.
Anthea Hartig, welcome.
Thank you, Scott. It's a pleasure.
Take us back to 1864, if you would. President Lincoln signs the Yosemite Grant Act. What role did photography have on him, do you think? It was right during the Civil War. He was seeing photos of the dead that Matthew Brady was doing. And photography was new at the time.
Brand new, and the first photographer in the Yosemite Valley was only in 1859, and it was Carleton Watkins who comes in 1861, develops a whole new way of a large-size camera, which he called the mammoth print, so they could take extra large photographs to try and somehow capture the beauty of that scenery. And Watkins' show premiered at the Gallery in New York, where Matthew Brady's photographs had just been. So here are Brady's photographs of carnage on corpses on the battlefields, and in comes, Watkins with Yosemite. And we know that the state senator from California who proposed the Yosemite Act and got it through Congress had a set of Watkins, like we have at the California Historical Society, and we're pretty sure showed them to Lincoln.
Yeah.
So how could he not be so swayed by that beauty?
Yeah, and of course there's so many iconic photos now, Ansel Adams, of course, and others, El Capitan, Half Dome. But this is much more than that. This exhibit is really described as a human history of the park. What does that mean?
Correct. Well, when you think of the almost 10,000 years of human occupation and sculpting and use of what we call Yosemite, we wanted to bring forth some of those remarkable stories. So in the galleries, there are about 23 stories, and then in our accompanying ebook, there's a couple dozen more.
Give us an example of one that stands out for you.
One of the more beautiful ones that stands out for me is the story of Julia Parker, who still is alive, a beautiful, beautiful soul, who was sent, like many California Indians, to boarding school, an Indian boarding school in Nevada, meets her husband. He's from the valley, he's from the Yosemite Valley. So he brings his beautiful bride home and introduces us to her mother and his grandmother and his aunties, who are all, basket makers of the highest order. And she didn't even know anymore what she said it was like to be an Indian, never mind to be an Indian basket maker. So she goes on to be one of the most acclaimed basket makers ever, and she's asked to make a basket for the Queen of England when she's visiting in the 1960s.
And there's a picture of her presenting that basket to her and Prince Philip, I think.
Absolutely. And her family, who are Pomo here from the northern coast, saw the picture in the newspaper and reconnected with her.
Wow.
Never having known her, never having seen her.
Wow.
And turns out she is a descendant from the most amazing basket maker of the Pomo. So.
There are some photos in this exhibit that are kind of like double take. You do a double take. Like there's one of a bear standing on its hind legs with a woman maybe 6 feet away.
Right.
Is that a real bear?
That's a real bear that was trained by the park's first female naturalist in the 1920s, this spectacular woman named Enid. And at the time, bears were supposed to be like pets, especially smaller bears, obviously. And
so that wasn't a grizzly?
That was a black bear. The grizzlies had been gone from the valley since the 1880s. And in the exhibition, we show one of the last grizzlies shot in the valley. And so it describes for us this tension between how natural should it be and the ways in which man and nature and culture have kind of wrestled in that. Now, of course, we don't feed the bears. There's a keep bears wild policy, and it's kind of gone the other way in terms of feeding bears sugar cubes, which is what Enid was doing with them. Yeah.
Well, it seemed happy. It seemed like a happy bear.
Happy relationship.
There was another photo of these two women, dressed in the garb of the day, long dresses, I believe, standing on top of these pine tree, a limb of a pine tree.
Right.
It almost looks photoshopped.
Yeah. Right. So that pine tree grew out of solid granite at 4,000 feet, and that surprisingly was one of the most photographed trees in the park until it died in 2003. But these women kind of playfully standing on the tree that Ansel Adams shot and that so many others shot before him, again is this, I think, this wonderful symbol of how we got to know Yosemite, largely through photographs at first. and how we're displaying a lot of it through photographs in the gallery. But what kind of special magic happens when we go there?
There is a rich history in the park of climbing.
Absolutely.
And how does that play out in the exhibit?
We bring forth the really amazing story of climbing starting in about 1958, but really reaches its moment as California, of course, is going through wrenching changes, cultural, social changes in the 1960s. And we see the show through the eyes, especially of Glenn Denny, who's still alive. He lives here in San Francisco. Went into the park first to photograph and then started to climb. And he has this wonderful, wonderful quote that the air was his platform, that they learned, like Muybridge and Watkins before them, they took these daring, feats of photographic courage as they climbed. And then, of course, as climbing evolved into the kind of free climbing, this amazing, death-defying culture. And they all camped out at Camp 4, because it was the only free park, the only free campground at the park, and created this really vibrant, interesting kind of hippie climbing culture.
What about you? You told me earlier, a third-generation California. Do you have your own rich memories of Yosemite?
I do. It was interesting. Like many Californians, I went all over the world before I went to Yosemite, which you can say is phenomenally sad. And of course, I knew it through photography and as a California historian. And it was only when our two sons were small, about 10 years ago, that we first went. And the sacredness of that landscape, whether you've seen it 100 times or whether you've been there 100 times, is so overwhelming and beautiful.
And just quickly, this is an interactive exhibit, I'm sure. I mean, there are
Absolutely.
things that kids can do. It's very
Lots
family
of things,
friendly.
Family friendly, beautiful visuals, over literally hundreds of different objects, artifacts,
All right,
videos.
and showing through
January 25th. You have the whole rest of the year.
All right, Anthea Hartig, thank you so much for sharing it with
Scott.
us.
Great, thank you.